Welcome, this is Carrie Schell from On Point Quilter. In today's tutorial, I'm going to be veering away from my normal electric quilt 8 tutorials and talk about the construction process for my Teeny Tiny Hearts postcard. I will be sharing my experience in using a couple of new foundation piecing tools I recently purchased. Okay, I'm going to show you how I'm using the triple duty 8-inch seam allowance guide. So this guide can be used either as a 1/4-inch guide or an 1/8-inch guide. And the way you just change it is there's this little snap thing. So you can flip the ruler around so you can do either 1/8 inch on one side or 1/4 inch on the other side. Or you can flip the guide around and you can use it if you're right-handed or left-handed. Because I'm working with really miniature blocks, I'm going to use the 1/8 inch guide. I will be working on the third set of foundations, and what I decided to do was to take the earlier sets and make them A1 in this third set. So I'm going to take the seam guide and I'm going to put that on top on the space where I'm going to sew my next line. And I'm going to fold the foundation paper back, and then I'm going to move the guide so we've got the 1/8 inch against the white seam guide that I just folded against. And then I'm going to just trim that. And then I'm going to take my piece and I'm going to take one of my green fabrics and I'm going to line it up with the edge that I just sewed. So now I'm going to go to the back side of the foundation and I'm going to sew on the visible line. And I have my machine set to 1.2, so a really small stitch length. Now I'm also going to note that I made sure that I went to the edge of my seam allowances, and so I also extended about a 1/4 inch on the other side as well. And so once I've sewn my 1/8 inch seam, I'm going to press that to the patch that I just sewed on. Now I'm ready to do the patch on the other side. And so I'm going to put this on my cutting mat, fold back on the next line that I'm going to sew on, and then move that seam allowance guide. And I'm going to cut so I have an 1/8 inch away from my next seam. Take another piece of fabric and I'm going to sew on the line for that. Now for the next one, you'll notice that I had extended a couple of those seam allowances, and so when I go to fold back the paper, it's not going to fold back unless I tear away the foundation where I've stitched over it. Now, one of the things that I discovered, this actually tears away really nicely, and I actually had less issues with the foundation tearing than I did with the newsprint that I normally use. And so that's I viewed as a real plus. Okay, once I fold that back, move that to the 1/4 inch, and then trim this and sew on the line on the back. So once I have this section done, I am going to cut a 1/4 inch away from the center of the foundation. Now it's very light, but I have the seam allowances on here, so I can use those as a guide, or I can just use this tool and flip to the other side, which has the 1/4 inch guide on it and use that as a guide to cut the edges of my foundation. Now at this point, I can either choose to remove the paper or I could keep the paper in. Just to show you, I'm going to remove some just so you can see. It tears very nicely. And one of the reasons I chose to do that is I have 3 layers of paper because I'm doing foundations on top of foundations on top of foundations. And I would prefer not to have the added bulk. Let me go ahead and finish up the top section and then I will rejoin you. Okay, I have sewed the top, removed the paper from the back, and now I'm just going to put those top and bottom sections together using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And because I did remove the foundations, I want to make sure I'm not stretching my fabric. And I will increase to about 2.5 on my machine. Because this is a little bit bigger piece. Now the other thing that I want to do is press my seam allowances open. There's just a lot of bulk here, and I think it will lay flatter if I do. So here's the view from the back, here's the view from the front. Now I'm ready to add borders based on my design in Electric Quilt. Okay, once I got those borders on, I went and found a piece of cardstock. I centered it on my quilt and realized that when I cut my borders, I should have subtracted a 1/4 inch all the way around. However, I will just cut the extra off when I cut the edges of both the cardstock and the quilt with my pinking shears. And so I now have a postcard all ready to send. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video that showed an excerpt from my process in constructing those teeny tiny hearts. If you would like additional tips and techniques, please subscribe to my weekly newsletter at www.onpointquilter.com. The majority of my emails will be focused on Electric Quilt.